of a 25,000-foot sort of presentation, because I've used discussion boards. I've been teaching online for a couple of years, and I'm looking for ways to take a tool and use it and then examine it and then make the use of that tool more effective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's the instructor role in the discussion board. Let me just give you a little background. This class was RPW 370, the Foundations of Rhetoric, and it's kind of it is an upper level survey course where we take students from the Aristotelian rhetoricians all the way up to the postmodernist and sort of some funky stuff in between. It's difficult reading. It is challenging reading. I saw all of you just went, next. So challenging reading, and this course was totally online. And I had not taught it before. My colleague Nils Heiberg was planning to teach it, but then he got a sabbatical, and he said, "Would you like to teach this course?" And I said, "Well, let's give it a try." But I wanted to use the discussion board. I knew that, and so for this class, the goals of using the discussion board, I was pretty clear about that. I wanted it to motivate them to read the assigned text, which again were gnarly. They were complicated texts. And the way I set up the discussion boards, it really required students to show mastery of the reading. They had to understand the reading. And then it also allowed them to ask questions. And it allowed them ultimately to debate concepts, because many of these concepts have a lot of controversy. And again, in a 100% online class, database becomes the discussion board becomes the meeting place. It's kind of the virtual version of the classroom discussion. And when this class is taught online, there's a lot of in-class discussion, which starts out something like, what the heck is Foucault saying? And then moving on to bigger and better stuff. So I'm always asking myself, what's effective? And you're asking yourself this as well, how do we make discussion board effective? And certainly I've found, as other people have said here, that have to tie it to a significant portion of the grade. If students do not get graded on a discussion board, even our wonderful adult students, they will find other things to do. And this was a summer course too, so I had the distraction of picnics and beach and feastings and everything like that. So it's a participation thing, but it's also, again, that mastery of content. It works really well, I have found through experience, to make sure that I state the expectations I have clearly in a rubric, clearly to the point of, I think, oh, this is painful, but the students need that guidance. They want to know. They need to know exactly what I expect. And ultimately, I may start at the level of content, but ultimately I need to use prompts that elicit the sort of more complex levels of learning. It gets pretty boring if we just do content all semester. So that's kind of the effectiveness rubric. The big question then becomes, what about me? How involved should I be? How visible should I be in this class discussion? That's easy to figure out face to face. We talk, I say, all right, everybody get out your handout on Foucault. And I can tell from their faces, generally the avoidance of eye contact, whether or not they've read it. You have that immediate feedback. I don't have that online. Okay, I wasn't using WebEx because we had students in 3 different time zones and I was traveling. So I figured I really didn't want to navigate all that plus technology that still had some bugs in it. So I said, we'll just do this the old-fashioned way. Another question, yeah. What should my role be? After I did the initial setup, should I be primarily an observer, kind of a lurker, as on Facebook? Should I be an active commentator? When a student posts something, should I comment back? Should I comment but maybe another way? Or should I facilitate but not comment? Now, what I realized as I was thinking about this, and as I was going through this class too, is I had internal rules of engagement. I just hadn't really articulated them. And so I've noticed that for first-year students, I definitely set up the discussion board, I mediate, I comment, I facilitate. I do, it's a very engaged sort of thing. And the reason is that the students don't know how to do this. They really don't. So I become their role model. Right? And that's how they learn how to do it. I can't possibly expect them to do it on their own. Advanced students get more interesting. Definitely set up the database and do it, or I keep saying database, discussion board. Provide feedback by email. I'll talk about that. And encourage the students to do their own facilitation. Again, the reasoning is that advanced students are more skilled, and I'm trying to get them less dependent on me for critical thinking. I have found that if I mediate too much, I get what I call the meerkat response. You know, as soon as I sign on to the discussion board and start talking, they all go and wait for me to do the wisdom thing. And that's not what I want to happen. I want them to do it. So what I was doing in this class, in the 370 class, I was setting up the discussion board. I was letting them run with it. And I was providing feedback by email. And I had 2 levels of email feedback. I had a global to everyone email that said, you got this, this is good, you're understanding this well, I'm noticing this, you know, again, the more global. And then because this was a smallish class, it was fewer than 15, I was able to send every student just a very quick email that said, I noticed you said this about Foucault. That's really astute. Think about this. Again, to continue to generate that higher level thinking and to move them toward their other assignments. By the way, did you know that the meerkats have their own website, meerkat.org? According to some of the research that's out there, which is where I go for answers when I can't completely figure something out myself, there are kind of 3 large areas of facilitation. There's the instructor-led, which I think is appropriate for some entry-level classes. It's very focused, it's very directive. It's certainly more time-consuming for the faculty member. And it has the disadvantage of less opportunity for active and self-directed learning. But again, in early sort of rounds of this, it may be very necessary. I certainly find with my 110 students, for example, they need more instructor-led facilitation. The second type of facilitation is student-led and assigned, where I assign them the role. You know, each person is in charge of something each week, and you know, I coach them on this. There are you know, instructions and various things posted, but you know, the student is responsible each week for facilitating discussion in some way. And again, that's tough. They kind of freak out at first. They think, oh my God, I'm not a teacher. I can't do this. And I say, but yeah, we're all teachers and learners, and here are the kind of steps you take. And again, feedback privately, usually by email, with maybe some global comments of things of commonality are coming up. Now, the third facilitation type, which I will tell you I'm working toward, is student-led and spontaneous. Not directed by the instructor, but coming out of the energy and the engagement of students. Have any of you had that happen on discussion boards? In a good way? I mean, I understand sometimes they just go nuts. And then you have to jump in and say, excuse me, we need to get back on target. Yeah, but I mean, this is sort of the best of all possible worlds, that students are actually leading this discussion. You've had it happen in class, where they sort of take over the class and it's a good thing. But those are the 3 models. And it occurs to me that probably within any class, lower level or upper level, that there may be some of each of these, and that's okay. Now, part of what prompted me to really examine this more closely is an incident that happened in this class, where in this class I was again using that sort of minimalist approach, and I'll show you the discussion board in a moment. I was providing a lot of feedback. I was doing the group emails. I was busy. And again, the discussion board post was asking students to respond to a fairly structured post about the reading content, to test their comprehension, and that then led to a short writing assignment that asked them to take these various sources and synthesize or analyze or contextualize it. Again, complex tasks that they couldn't do if they didn't understand what the texts were saying. I got a flame on the discussion board from a student who said, if you're not posting a response to our post on discussion boards, you're not doing your job. I had a little conversation with him in my head offline that I can't repeat here. But when I get that strong of a response from a student, I take into consideration that this was a he in this case, that he was just being a pain. That's possible, and he did have that tendency, so that was okay. But it also made me think. Say, all right, if he's perceiving it this way, possibly other students are perceiving a disengagement. So how do students see this? Of course, yes, I had said to them, this is my approach. And I repeated it, but also maybe sort of start thinking again about more theoretical, big picture things. And how do students perceive us as instructors online? There's some interesting research about this concept of immediacy, that sense of closeness. We all know we develop it in the classroom. Absolutely. And it's our behavior as interpreted by students. This study, which was a good-sized study of about 500 students, tested sort of visual stuff versus non-visual, and you won't be surprised to know that the highest sense of immediacy comes from those visual clues. So that's why we're using WebEx and all things like that. There's a lower sense of immediacy from just verbal, Audacity files or whatever, and then the lowest from strictly offline. Okay, so I was saying, okay, well, this student maybe is responding to a perceived lack of immediacy because I was doing email response and he, I guess, saw discussion boards maybe more immediate. But again, it can contribute to a sense of a lack of effectiveness. But again, the highest sort of perceptions of value, feedback examples, modeling, and various levels and types of check-in. So again, as I was thinking about this student's response and also thinking about how do I make discussion board as effective as it can possibly be, I'm saying, okay, check, got feedback, lots of feedback. Obviously not the kind everybody wanted, but feedback. Examples, and again, sample papers posted. Modeling, which I think I'm doing most of the time anyway. And again, varieties of check-in response. And you can see from your handout, again, some of the things surprised me. Contacting non-participants, establishing synchronous meeting times. That was more near the bottom, at least for this study. Connecting with course objectives. So I thought that was, again, interesting feedback, which sort of validated what I was doing, but maybe left some possibilities open. Again, some interesting points from the research. This is an article about instructor-learner interaction. That how instructors and how students perceive this online learning experience differs. I guess we shouldn't be surprised. But not surprising, we're focused on course content, because we have lots of stuff to get out there, where students often are focused more on the softer stuff, the communication needs being treated as individuals. So I think for many of us, that means that we are obviously content driven. We have content that we have to deal with, but we've got to figure out how to achieve that content integration and engagement while still students having this perception of the immediacy, the availableness of the instructor. And the last question was important to me because I really felt that this was an online teaching experience different from all others, and a lot of it had to do with the difficulty of the material. There was just this tension where students were struggling. So again, it brings me back to this sort of central question. Do I mediate more? Do I stay sort of where I am now? Do I talk more about mediating, and what my approach is? Do I give up and just teach on site and say forget it? And I'll tell you, I don't have a conclusion right now. I am still struggling with this and would be interested in sort of your thoughts and your experience. There are times when Aruba looks good. I'm thinking I can be in Aruba and teach online, and this is a beautiful thing. As I was sort of walking to class today, I was thinking maybe my process needs to be kind of starting from here and then arcing up. You know, I wonder if I had started with a highly mediated sort of engagement at first and then slowly backed off. If that might be sort of one way to approach this. Again, if I'm encountering student resistance because of the difficulty of the material. You run into the same thing?
You know, I can say from a student's point of view, during my master's program, we did a lot of discussion board. And it was like the meerkat thing. When the instructor added to the discussion board, we were all like, oh, is he doing that because we're wrong? Why did he do that? And we're all like, I get it. And, you know, we changed our answers. And so I'm not sure if that's a great thing to constantly contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that if I jump in too quickly, just like in class, you know, there's that long pause where you throw out a question and they suddenly look at you like, A, you've grown 3 heads, and B, you've shifted to Martian or something like that. Yeah, and I mean, we can wait that out a little bit more online, but still, there's that moment of tension where we think, oh.
I had the same experience. If I jumped in too early, it just stopped. Everything just stopped. But the other thing too is, in my experience, and not here but at other universities, is it really depended on who I had in the class. Because if I had 2 or 3 mature students who really wanted to learn, who kind of would take that lead on the discussion board, boy, it went in a very different direction than the students who just didn't want to have a whole lot of involvement.
And that's been my experience too, and what was odd with this class is I did have a number of mature students who were also really struggling with reading this difficult theoretical stuff, and so they defaulted back into that meerkat mode. I said, okay, you know, just let the girl talk and see what happens.
So were you having lectures posted online, or?
I wasn't. The material was so dense, the way I set up the discussion boards was I had sort of focus questions, and I assigned either different individuals or teams to the focus questions, and then had them report back to me, and then I sort of reported back to the group. I really wanted them to be more active rather than me doing lectures, which I don't, you know, I tried to do a lecture on Michel Foucault, and I put myself to sleep. So.
Now, one more question. Generally, with these boards, do you summarize the discussion? So you post a question. Do you, at the end of the discussion, summarize?
Sometimes, and I usually do that in a group email rather than on the discussion board, because I've noticed that they pay more attention to the email. I don't know why, but I think, yeah, summarizing and sort of trying to pull together all the threads is absolutely good. It helps me clarify, and I think it definitely helps them. And sometimes I've assigned that to a student as well. Say, okay, pull this together, summarize our discussion, put it out there.
Coming at it from the other point of view, I've done monitoring for Charter Oak of online courses, and one of their big issues is instructors not participating. And you know, maybe you're at the advanced end of the scale with a lot of advanced learning goals, but you know, we see examples, for instance, of students congratulating each other on ideas that were completely, you know, at least in this case, wrong,
yes,
and the instructor
absolutely
never came in as if they weren't in the classroom. So, do you handle that kind of thing more at the end of the summary? Do you at what point
lurk.
do you?
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is something I have to remind my students. I lurk constantly on discussion board. I don't necessarily comment, but if there were 2 instances in this class actually, one where a student posted something that was completely bogus, and so I emailed him and said, "May I suggest a repost?" and he said, "Okie doke." And in the other case, a student flamed another student and just was completely nasty and inappropriate. And I removed that post, and I sent him a note. I sent that person a note and said, you absolutely may not do this. You have to repost, but you still only get 50, because I want you to remember this. And then I posted just a reminder, a gentle reader reminder that said, let's remember. Because I didn't know how many people had seen it at that point. It said, a gentle reminder that yes, we have to be civil. Calling names is not appropriate, etc. Again, I'm still finding my way here of saying how much is enough to really facilitate the learning, how much is too much. And it all gets mixed in then with student perceptions, which may or may not be accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that what you're saying about sort of putting a damper on it, I understand that. And the examples you gave maybe made sense to email directly. But it seems as if the class has had a discussion, they've gotten an accounting concept completely wrong. At some point, the instructor's got to come in there.
Oh, absolutely.
And
I'm not against that kind of mediation. I think that's absolutely appropriate.
It sounds like you're at a more advanced level than just, is the instructor there? And maybe you've got to do more telling, selling to the students that you are doing that kind of, of that process.
And again, it's different for a 100 level class, 200 level class. I'm much more kind of in the middle of things because I think it's my job to model. A 300 level class, one of my course objectives says you're expected to work independently and be much more sort of self-starting. And if I jump in too much, they back off. So it's, again, there's no one size fits all. I've noticed that in a couple of instances with the class that I'm teaching now that's on site when we use some discussion board, I've sort of shifted my way of doing things halfway through because I wasn't getting the results I wanted.
Another comment from a student point of view on discussion board and online. When we had to facilitate our own business graduate level, your learning was very intense because you were right out there with your, in front of your peers, putting out questions, facilitating, and then the Uber instructor was looking over the whole thing. So you read, double read,
Triple read.
worked out questions and the answers. Great way for deep learning.
And to come back to this comment about correcting, a mistake, in one happy case, one student posted something that was just not a very good reading of a particular feminist theorist. And another student came in, and I sort of pictured her with her hands on her hips, because she said the equivalent of, now wait a minute, and gently but effectively corrected that. And of course, ideally, that's the best learning, where the student jumps in and says, oh, hold on. But again, I learned a lot, and if I don't see that happening, then I'm
So after that, do you feel like after that good response, that if you came in with a smiley face or an atta girl or whatever, that would actually then dampen too much the other direction? I'm just curious if you then came in to
I
sort of...
came in by email. I sent that student an email and said, atta girl. Good job.
See, I'm wondering if the other
But
students...
I didn't do it on the discussion.
Would the other students have picked up which was the better, like who won the point, so to speak?
I'm trying to think back, and I know that I commented by email on saying, yeah, okay, I think a slightly more accurate reading is this. I can see how this student got this,